It was an ordinary morning when Jack stepped into the first-class cabin of the flight from Los Angeles to New York. The air inside was cool, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint hum of the airplane's engines. He slid into his seat, adjusted the cushion, and settled in with a sense of satisfaction. Jack wasn't a man who had to worry about flights in economy anymore. He had worked his way up over the years, climbing from a modest background to managing a successful business that allowed him to indulge in the luxuries he had once only dreamed of. But as the plane prepared for takeoff, there was something nagging at him, a restlessness he couldn't quite shake. Jack had always considered himself a man of ambition, a self-made success story. He had spent decades building his reputation, working tirelessly to grow his small company into something significant. His peers respected him for his drive, his no-nonsense approach to business, and his ability to make the right decisions under pressure. He prided himself on having worked his way through every obstacle, every challenge, without relying on handouts or shortcuts. And yet, as he looked out the window, watching the ground fall away and the city skyline blur into the distance, there was a subtle discomfort in the pit of his stomach. He glanced over at the man sitting beside him, a man who seemed oddly out of place in the plush first-class environment. The man was dressed simply, in a black hoodie and sunglasses, his demeanor calm and unassuming. He didn't look like the typical first-class passenger. Most of the people Jack was used to seeing in this section of the plane were business executives or high-net-worth individuals, flaunting their wealth and status through designer suits and flashy accessories. This man, however, seemed almost ordinary. Jack was intrigued but chose to mind his own business. After all, he wasn't one to make assumptions about people based on their appearances. But as the minutes ticked by and the plane leveled off in the sky, Jack found his attention drawn back to the stranger. There was something about him that felt different, something that Jack couldn't put his finger on. The man wasn't reading a newspaper or checking his phone like most passengers. Instead, he was absorbed in his laptop, tapping away at the keys with a focused intensity. Jack's curiosity got the better of him. Maybe it was the fact that he had been working non-stop for weeks, juggling meetings and business deals, or maybe it was just his need to assert himself. He had never been one to keep quiet when something piqued his interest. Jack cleared his throat, then turned to the man. "You know," Jack began, trying to sound casual, "it's always funny to see people like you. All this technology and innovation, and yet here we are, all just trying to escape reality for a few hours. You'd think with all the money and resources, you'd have figured out how to fix this whole flying thing by now." The man glanced up from his laptop, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. Jack continued, sensing an opening for conversation. "It's crazy, isn't it? The way people like you live in this world of convenience and comfort. I mean, how many millions did you make last year just sitting in front of a screen and typing away?" Jack's words were cutting, though his tone remained casual. There was a certain smugness in his voice, one that came from years of working hard to earn his place among the business elite. Jack had seen it all, billionaires, CEOs, tech moguls, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind, especially when he felt like he was being surrounded by people who hadn't truly earned their success. The man didn't react immediately, but Jack could see the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, as if he found Jack's comments somewhat amusing. This only fueled Jack's fire. He pressed on. "I just don't get it," Jack continued, leaning in slightly. "I mean, you guys make billions, but for what? To make a few more apps and gadgets that no one really needs? What's the point of all this? The world's still broken, people are still struggling, and here you are, sipping on your fancy drink, thinking you're changing the world with a few tweets." Jack chuckled to himself, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He had a way with words, and his critique felt like a small victory against the kind of people he often felt were disconnected from the real world. He wasn't a man who tolerated arrogance, and tech moguls, in his mind, epitomized that arrogance. They played in a different league, a league that had little to do with the daily grind that people like him had experienced. The man remained silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving Jack's. Jack started to feel a slight unease, but he quickly brushed it aside. Maybe the man was just shy or didn't know how to respond. After all, it wasn't every day that someone like Jack, a seasoned business executive, took the time to point out the flaws in the world of high-tech billionaires. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm and even, without a trace of the defensiveness that Jack had expected. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Jack blinked, taken aback by the man's sudden shift in tone. The words hung in the air, lingering between them like a puzzle Jack couldn't quite solve. The man's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his gaze, something Jack couldn't place, that made him pause. "I don't care who you are," Jack said, brushing it off with a smirk. "It's not about who you are. It's about what you do. And let's face it, most of what you do doesn't really matter." The man didn't seem offended, nor did he appear surprised. He simply nodded, as if Jack's words didn't faze him. There was a moment of silence before the man slowly lowered his sunglasses, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce through Jack's bravado. "I'm not just anyone," the man said quietly, his voice almost too calm. "I've built things. Things that change the world. And I've lost just as much as I've gained. But the question you need to ask yourself is, do you really know what it means to create something that shifts the course of history?" Jack's heart skipped a beat. He tried to laugh it off, but the words lingered in his mind. "Look, buddy," Jack began, a little less certain now, "I don't have time for some philosophical lecture. I'm just saying, guys like you are out of touch." The man leaned back in his seat, a wisp of a smile on his lips. "Maybe you're right. But maybe, just maybe, you're not in a position to understand it all. Not yet, anyway." For the first time during their exchange, Jack felt a flicker of doubt. The man's calmness, his confidence, rattled him. He had expected anger or a challenge, but instead, the man seemed completely unfazed. And it was that very calmness that made Jack question his own words, his own perceptions. Maybe he had overstepped. But before Jack could respond, the plane's captain came over the intercom, signaling the descent into New York. The conversation was cut short, and Jack, now feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and intrigue, turned his attention back to the window. But as the skyline of New York came into view, one thought lingered in Jack's mind: who was this man, and what had he just said? Jack's phone buzzed incessantly as he tried to focus on the task at hand, but every notification seemed to remind him of the difficult situation he had found himself in. It had been nearly a month since the encounter with Musk, and Jack had struggled to regain his footing. What had seemed like a normal first-class flight had turned into a life-altering moment that left him with more questions than answers. The harsh reality of the world around him, one where wealth, power, and influence dictated success, had been upended by the seemingly inconsequential words from a man he had once viewed as a far-off celebrity. Jack wasn't a man who dealt well with introspection. He had always been driven by numbers, by the measurable metrics of success, profit margins, stock prices, quarterly reports. He had built his empire one deal at a time, cutting through competition with precision and focus. He didn't have time for self-doubt or philosophical musings. But now, as he sat in his downtown office overlooking the city, he found himself grappling with those very questions. Musk's words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he had believed to be true about success and ambition. "It's not about the wins," Musk had said, his voice calm but insistent, "it's about the risks. It's about the legacy you leave behind." Jack had spent his entire career measuring success by the size of his bank account, the scale of his business empire, and the recognition he earned from his peers. But now, the more he reflected on those words, the more hollow they seemed. Musk, a man who had seemingly everything, had defied convention in ways Jack could barely fathom. Tesla, SpaceX, and countless other ventures had made Musk one of the most influential men on the planet, but he hadn't done it by playing it safe. Musk had gambled with his fortune, his reputation, and his future, all for ideas that seemed too audacious, too risky to ever succeed. And yet, against all odds, he had succeeded, and in doing so, had reshaped entire industries and challenged the world's understanding of innovation. Jack couldn't shake the realization that he had spent his life building a fortress of wealth, but at the expense of taking risks that could truly change the world. He had always considered himself a smart investor, a man who understood the market and knew how to generate returns. But had he ever truly built something that mattered? Sure, his company was profitable, but profit alone seemed an increasingly shallow goal. Jack began to look at the leaders he had admired, the icons of his industry, and realized they had all done something different. They had pushed boundaries, embraced failure, and above all, they had risked everything for the chance to change the world. The more Jack thought about Musk's words, the more it became clear that his path had been shaped by fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing what he had worked so hard to build. And that fear had kept him on the sidelines, playing it safe while others were willing to push forward with ideas that were risky, unconventional, and potentially world-changing. Jack knew he could never look at the world the same way again. He needed to take a step back, to reevaluate everything he had done, and ask himself a question he had long avoided: what did he really want his legacy to be? At first, Jack tried to dismiss the feelings of unease. It was easier to blame the pressure of the media, the business setbacks, and the weight of running a company that had reached the heights of global recognition. But deep down, Jack knew that something within him had shifted. He began to look at his employees, his partners, and the communities his company touched, and realized that his success was built not on innovation, but on market dominance. He had never sought to change the world, he had merely sought to claim a larger piece of it. And now, as the weight of that realization pressed down on him, Jack knew he had to make a choice: continue down the same path, playing by the same rules, or break free and pursue something greater. It wasn't just a matter of business strategy anymore. Jack had reached a point where he had to confront the very essence of his identity. He had spent decades building his empire, but now it felt hollow. Was he truly fulfilled? Did he have the courage to step into the unknown, to challenge the very foundation of the system that had made him successful? Or would he remain trapped by his own fears, too afraid to risk everything for the possibility of something more? He found himself consumed by doubt. What did it mean to truly take a risk? Jack wasn't sure anymore. He could put more money into his current business model, doubling down on what had worked for him in the past. He could push forward with plans to expand into new markets, continue acquiring smaller companies, and dominate his sector even further. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The words Musk had said were still fresh in his mind, cutting through the noise of his doubts: the future isn't about playing it safe. It's about changing the world. One afternoon, after weeks of wrestling with his thoughts, Jack decided to take action. He closed his office door, sat at his desk, and began to outline a new vision for his company. It was time for a radical shift. He didn't know exactly what that would look like, but he knew that he couldn't continue on the same path. He was going to use his resources to make a real difference. Jack decided that he would focus on sustainability, on innovations that could help solve global problems, on technology that could reshape entire industries for the better. He wasn't sure how he would pull it off, but he was determined to make it work. Jack's decision didn't come without its consequences. When word spread about the new direction, there was an immediate backlash. His board of directors didn't understand. Many of his investors questioned the move, fearing that Jack was losing focus and risking the stability of the company. Even some of his closest colleagues expressed concerns, unsure about the direction he was taking. Jack felt the weight of the doubts, but he refused to let them deter him. He had seen the risks Musk had taken, and he realized that without risk, there could be no real change. In the days that followed, Jack started reaching out to people who had walked the path he was now embarking on. He sought out innovators, environmentalists, and entrepreneurs who had successfully created businesses that combined profitability with purpose. He attended conferences, met with experts, and immersed himself in new ideas. With each conversation, Jack felt a sense of urgency. The world was changing rapidly, and he knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to make a real difference. There was no time to waste. But as Jack dove deeper into the world of social entrepreneurship and sustainability, he realized just how difficult it would be. It wasn't just about building a company that focused on profitability, it was about redefining what success truly meant. He had to find ways to balance social responsibility with business growth, to prove that a company could not only succeed financially but also have a positive impact on the world. The first few months were a whirlwind of meetings, pitches, and research. Jack felt like a novice in a world that seemed completely foreign to him. But slowly, things started to fall into place. He restructured his company's priorities, investing in projects that would benefit the environment, creating initiatives to help underserved communities, and developing sustainable technologies. Jack found himself thinking. As the plane began its descent into New York, Jack couldn't shake the strange sensation that had crept over him during his brief exchange with the man beside him. For the remainder of the flight, Jack remained silent, his eyes occasionally drifting to the man next to him, who was once again absorbed in his laptop. There was a certain stillness about him, an almost unsettling calm that contrasted sharply with Jack's own unease. Jack had always prided himself on being in control, on being able to handle any situation with sharp wit and confidence, but this encounter had shaken him. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but there was something about the man's presence, his words, that left him questioning himself. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the terminal, Jack found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. What was it about the man that made him feel so off balance? He had made his fair share of sharp remarks over the years, but never had he felt the way he did now, vulnerable, almost as if he had been seen through. He had assumed that someone who lived in the tech world, who made billions with the tap of a key, would be out of touch, oblivious to the struggles of ordinary people. But the man beside him had been different. He didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he had calmly challenged Jack's assumptions in a way that felt almost effortless. That calmness, that quiet assurance, left Jack wondering if he had misjudged not just the man but an entire world that he had only seen through a narrow lens. As the plane came to a stop and passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts, Jack stood up, eager to get off the flight and away from the unsettling encounter. He gathered his belongings, but as he reached for his briefcase, he noticed the man beside him had already stood and was making his way down the aisle. Jack hesitated for a moment, then grabbed his bag and followed. It was only when they reached the jetway that Jack made the decision to approach the man, driven by a mixture of curiosity and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Hey," Jack called out, his voice tentative but determined. The man paused, turning slightly to look at him, his expression unreadable. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't mean to offend you." Jack offered a smile, trying to downplay the awkwardness, but the man didn't respond right away. He simply studied Jack with those sharp eyes, as if evaluating him. The seconds stretched on, and Jack felt the weight of the silence. Finally, the man spoke. "You didn't offend me," he said, his voice even, almost detached. "You just don't understand, that's all." Jack blinked, taken aback by the response. "What do you mean?" The man let out a small sigh, as if considering whether to elaborate. "You don't get what it means to create something from nothing, to have the weight of the world on your shoulders, to take risks that could either change everything or destroy everything. It's not about money. It's about vision. It's about the willingness to do things that others won't, things that challenge everything people think they know." Jack stood there, caught off guard by the intensity in the man's words. The more he listened, the more he felt as if he were hearing a truth that was beyond his understanding. He had always equated success with money, hard work, smart decisions, and eventually, the financial rewards that came with them. But this man, this stranger, was speaking about something deeper. Something intangible. Before Jack could respond, the man turned and began to walk toward the gate. Jack hesitated for a moment, watching him go. And then, as if struck by a sudden realization, he did something he hadn't done in years. He followed. The man didn't acknowledge Jack as he walked ahead, but Jack found himself unable to turn away. They passed through the airport together, neither speaking, but Jack couldn't help but feel that there was something more to this encounter than mere coincidence. By the time they reached the baggage claim area, Jack was certain of one thing: this was no ordinary man. And just as he was about to open his mouth to speak again, the man stopped in his tracks, turning to face him. "You still don't get it, do you?" the man said, his voice now tinged with a hint of something more. "It's not about what I do or how much money I make. It's about understanding that the world you see isn't the world everyone else lives in. When you're at the top, you see things differently. You have to make decisions that affect not just your life, but the lives of thousands, maybe millions. You have to live with the consequences of those decisions every single day." Jack opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He had always thought he understood the weight of responsibility. He had built his own business from the ground up, after all. But this man, who Jack now realized was someone of unimaginable power and influence, was speaking from a place Jack couldn't even fathom. "You're right," Jack said quietly, the realization settling over him like a wave. "I don't understand." The man nodded, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "Maybe one day you will. But for now, you need to learn something: wealth isn't the key to success. It's the willingness to take risks. To go where others are afraid to go." Jack didn't know what to say. He felt both humbled and overwhelmed by the man's words. He had been so certain of his own path, so confident in his own version of success, but now, standing here, he couldn't help but feel small, insignificant even. The man's advice, the weight of it, hung in the air between them, and Jack found himself at a crossroads, unsure of what direction to take. Just as the man began to walk away, Jack stopped him one last time. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man turned to look at him, and for a moment, Jack saw something in his eyes that made him feel as though he were being weighed, measured. "You'll figure it out soon enough," the man said cryptically before disappearing into the crowd. Jack stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. He had tried to shake the feeling of confusion, of being out of his depth, but it clung to him like a shadow. Who was that man? And why did his words feel so important? It wasn't until much later that Jack learned the truth, that the man he had so casually insulted was none other than Elon Musk. The tech mogul, entrepreneur, and visionary, whose name had become synonymous with some of the most groundbreaking innovations of the 21st century. Jack was stunned. His heart raced as the weight of his earlier comments hit him like a ton of bricks. He had insulted one of the most influential men in the world, and he had done so without even realizing it. But there was something more that gnawed at Jack. The conversation, the words, the way Elon had spoken to him, it wasn't just about the man's identity. It was about the deeper truth that had been revealed to Jack in those few moments. Jack had been so focused on the superficial aspects of success, so preoccupied with his own ambition, that he had completely overlooked what it meant to truly create change. In the days that followed, Jack's mind continued to churn over the encounter. It had been a wake-up call, one that made him question everything he thought he knew about success, about ambition, and about the world itself. He knew one thing for certain: this encounter had changed him. He just didn't know yet how much it would change his life. In the weeks that followed, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of that strange encounter with Elon Musk. It gnawed at him constantly, and as much as he tried to move on, the words kept echoing in his mind. He had always thought of himself as someone who understood the game, someone who had mastered the art of business. But now, in the quiet moments of reflection, he realized just how little he truly knew. It wasn't just that Musk had been a tech mogul, it was the way Musk had carried himself, his quiet confidence, his ability to see the world in a way Jack never had. And most of all, it was the humility in Musk's words that had stuck with Jack, cutting through the layers of arrogance he had built over the years. For the first time, Jack found himself questioning the very foundation of his success. He had spent decades working his way up, making the tough decisions, and living a life that, on the surface, seemed enviable. But what had he truly created? What had he contributed to the world beyond his wealth? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his accomplishments, impressive as they were, felt hollow. They lacked the depth that Musk had talked about, the ability to take risks that changed the world, to build something that mattered. The question started to consume Jack's thoughts. Was he just a cog in the machine? Had his focus on making money and securing his own success blinded him to the bigger picture? He began to wonder what his legacy would be. Would he simply be remembered as a man who had made money, or was there something more meaningful he could do with the platform he had built? It wasn't long before Jack found himself searching for answers, diving deep into the world of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. He read books, attended seminars, and immersed himself in the stories of people who had dared to dream beyond the limits of what was thought possible. He devoured biographies of visionaries like Musk, Steve Jobs, and others who had shaped industries and revolutionized the world. With each story, Jack felt a growing sense of inadequacy. These were men who had taken risks, who had sacrificed everything for their vision, who had made mistakes but kept pushing forward, determined to change the course of history. Jack realized that he had never really taken risks, not in the way they had. He had always played it safe, climbing the corporate ladder step by step, taking calculated risks that kept him on solid ground. But he hadn't been bold. He hadn't been a true innovator. The turning point came when Jack attended a high-profile business conference in New York. The event was filled with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors, all gathered to discuss the future of business, technology, and innovation. Jack had attended these types of events many times before, but this time, something felt different. As he listened to the speakers, he was struck by how much they focused on the future, not just in terms of profit, but in terms of impact. They talked about building businesses that solved real-world problems, about using technology to improve lives, about pushing the boundaries of what was possible to make the world a better place. The more they spoke, the more Jack realized that he had been thinking about business all wrong. He had been focused on making money, on building an empire for himself, but he hadn't thought about the kind of impact his work could have on others. That night, after the conference, Jack couldn't sleep. His mind raced with ideas about ways he could use his business acumen to make a real difference. He thought about Musk's words, about the risks Musk had taken, and about the way he had changed the world with a vision that was both bold and ambitious. Jack had been playing it safe, but the truth was that he wanted to make a difference. He didn't want to be remembered for just his wealth. He wanted to leave a legacy that wasn't built on the number of zeros in his bank account, but on the way he had touched people's lives. In the days that followed, Jack began to take action. He shifted the focus of his company away from mere profit and began to explore ways to use his resources to address some of the pressing issues facing society: climate change, inequality, and access to technology. It was a difficult transition, and many of his colleagues and investors were skeptical. They told him that he was making a mistake, that he was risking everything for ideals that wouldn't pay off. But Jack was undeterred. He had seen the kind of impact that visionary leaders like Musk had made, and he knew that it was worth taking the risk. But the road was not easy. As Jack began to pivot his company toward social responsibility and innovation, he encountered resistance from all sides. Investors pulled out, and competitors took advantage of his momentary instability. Jack's decisions were scrutinized by the media, and many people began to question whether he had lost his edge. But Jack refused to give up. He continued to push forward, determined to prove that it was possible to do well by doing good. Months went by, and slowly, Jack began to see the fruits of his labor. The company started to attract new investors who shared his vision for a better future. They worked on sustainable technologies, developed new business models that focused on fairness and inclusion, and partnered with nonprofits to address global challenges. Jack's company became known not just for its profitability but for its impact. It wasn't long before the changes Jack had made began to reverberate throughout the industry. His company became a model for others, showing that it was possible to build a successful business while also making a positive impact on the world. But just as Jack was starting to feel like he was on the right track, something unexpected happened. A rival company, led by a tech giant who had always been a major player in the industry, launched a direct attack on Jack's business. They mocked his efforts, claiming that his focus on social issues was nothing more than a distraction from the bottom line. The media picked up on the story, and soon, Jack found himself at the center of a public battle. His company's stock took a hit, and the pressure mounted as the rival company's campaign gained traction. The situation was dire. Jack felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had risked everything to pursue a vision that he believed in, and now it seemed like it might all come crashing down. But just as he was about to throw in the towel, he received a message. It was from none other than Elon Musk. The message was short, but it hit Jack like a lightning bolt. The world isn't won by playing it safe. Keep going. The true test is not in the wins, but in how you rise after the fall. Jack read the message several times, each word sinking deeper into his consciousness. It was a reminder of everything Musk had said to him on that flight, everything he had learned since then. The path of an innovator, of a true visionary, was never easy. It was fraught with obstacles, setbacks, and criticism. But it was also filled with moments of profound impact, moments that could change the course of history. With renewed resolve, Jack faced the media and his critics head-on. He didn't back down. He didn't try to appease the masses. Instead, he doubled down on his vision, speaking with conviction about the importance of creating businesses that served the greater good. His company rallied behind him, and soon, the tide began to turn. The public began to see the value in Jack's approach, how he had taken risks not for profit, but for purpose. Jack's reputation slowly began to recover, but more importantly, he realized something profound. The battle he had faced wasn't just about business, it was about something deeper, something that transcended profit and success. It was about resilience. It was about the willingness to fight for what you believe in, even when the world seems stacked against you. And as he looked back on his journey, Jack knew one thing for certain: his encounter with Elon Musk had set him on a path that had not only changed his life but had also given him the opportunity to change the lives of others. The long-term consequences of that moment were still unfolding, but one thing was clear: Jack was no longer the same man who had boarded that plane in Los Angeles. He had learned to see the world through a different lens, to understand that true success wasn't just about money or power, but about creating something that mattered. And as he looked out over the city of New York, he realized that Jack's journey had only just begun, and as the weeks turned into months, he realized that the impact of his transformation was still rippling through every aspect of his life. His business had taken a new direction, focusing not just on profitability, but on social responsibility, and the shifts in his company's culture were undeniable. Employees, once focused solely on their own success and the bottom line, now rallied behind a shared vision, a vision that sought to make a difference in the world. The company became a beacon for others who wanted to build businesses that had a purpose beyond profits. Jack's newfound philosophy, shaped by the lessons he had learned from his brief encounter with Elon Musk, was beginning to take root, and it was changing the way his industry viewed success. But the personal transformation Jack had undergone was just as profound. The sharp businessman who had once craved validation from his peers, who had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, had been replaced by a man who sought something deeper. Jack began to ask himself questions that had never crossed his mind before. What was his true legacy? What kind of impact did he want to leave on the world? And, most importantly, was he willing to risk it all to follow a path that would not only challenge the status quo but change it? The initial backlash Jack faced from critics and rival businesses had begun to die down, but that didn't mean the pressure had eased. In fact, it had only intensified. The more successful Jack's company became in its pursuit of social good, the more it attracted attention from powerful figures who viewed Jack's mission as a threat to their own interests. They wanted to see him fail. They wanted to undermine his vision because it challenged everything they had worked for. The media was relentless, twisting his words, sensationalizing every decision he made, and painting him as an idealistic dreamer who was losing touch with reality. Investors started to question Jack's judgment. Some pulled their funds out, wary of the social impact initiatives that had begun to dominate his company's agenda. The uncertainty began to weigh on Jack again, reminding him of the familiar feeling of being on the edge of losing everything. Was just beginning. But this time, Jack was different. He was no longer afraid of failure. He had embraced it, understanding that failure wasn't a final destination, but a stepping stone toward something greater. The lessons he had learned from Musk's words, the risks, the sacrifices, and the unwavering commitment to a vision, echoed in his mind every time he was faced with a difficult decision. He remembered what Musk had said, "It's not about the wins. It's about how you rise after the fall." One particularly challenging moment came when a major partner, a corporation with which Jack's company had formed a strategic alliance, pulled out at the last minute. The reason, they claimed, was that Jack's recent moves toward environmental sustainability and corporate social responsibility were becoming too costly. Their shareholders were unhappy, and their board was pushing them to distance themselves from any company that wasn't solely focused on maximizing profits. It felt like a punch in the gut. Jack had fought long and hard to form that partnership, and now, it was slipping away. For a brief moment, Jack thought about giving up. He could easily return to his old ways, focus solely on the bottom line, and rebuild his financial empire. He could appease investors and shareholders who cared only about the numbers, without worrying about the larger impact of his work. But that was not the path he had chosen. That was not the path he had promised himself. He thought back to that flight, to the words of the man who had changed everything for him in the span of a few minutes. Jack remembered the calmness in Elon's voice, the quiet assurance that came from truly understanding the weight of every decision, the power to shape the future. Jack realized that if he turned his back on the mission he had started, everything he had worked for would be meaningless. In the face of adversity, Jack doubled down. Instead of panicking, he took action. He called a meeting with his remaining investors, and this time, he didn't mince words. He laid out the plan for the future, a plan that focused not only on achieving business growth but also on redefining what success meant in the business world. He spoke about the power of using technology and innovation to solve real-world problems, about creating products that were both profitable and sustainable, about building a culture that encouraged employees to take risks, innovate, and think beyond the bottom line. The meeting was tense, but Jack's conviction was undeniable. He spoke with the same quiet intensity that Musk had shown him on that flight. He reminded his investors that it wasn't enough to make money. They had to make a difference. The business world was changing, and those who didn't adapt would be left behind. Jack's message was clear: the future wasn't about blindly chasing profits, it was about creating a future where success was defined by the impact a company had on the world, not just the wealth it generated. Some of the investors were still skeptical, but a few saw the value in Jack's vision. Slowly, they began to come around, and the company managed to secure new investments from those who shared Jack's commitment to social responsibility. But it wasn't just the investors who began to take notice. Jack's company began to attract attention from the media, not as a failed idealist, but as a trailblazer in the evolving business landscape. The stories about Jack's unwavering belief in his vision began to change. No longer was he seen as a man who was out of touch with reality. Instead, he was portrayed as someone who was ahead of his time, someone who had the courage to stand up for his beliefs, even when the odds were stacked against him. As Jack's company gained momentum, he started to see the impact of his decisions in the real world. The sustainable technologies his team had developed began to make waves in the industry, providing businesses with new ways to reduce their carbon footprints and make a positive impact on the environment. The partnerships he had formed with social enterprises flourished, creating opportunities for marginalized communities and helping to bridge the gap between profit and purpose. Jack's business was no longer just a company, it was a movement. People across the globe began to see that it was possible to create wealth while also creating a better world. But despite the success, Jack never lost sight of the lessons he had learned from his encounter with Musk. He knew that the road ahead would not always be smooth. There would be setbacks, criticisms, and moments of doubt. But he was ready for them. He had learned to embrace the challenges, knowing that they were a part of the journey. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by how much money you made, but by how much you changed the world for the better. And with each decision, each new challenge, Jack was building not just a business, but a legacy. As the years passed, Jack's company continued to thrive, becoming a symbol of what was possible when visionaries dared to take risks and think beyond the conventional. Jack's reputation as an innovator, a leader, and a change-maker was solidified. But it was the quiet moments, the ones where he reflected on how far he had come, that meant the most to him. The man who had once been focused solely on financial success had been replaced by someone who understood the true power of purpose. And Jack knew that this transformation had only been possible because of that one fateful encounter on the plane with a man named Elon Musk, someone who had shown him the way, even when he hadn't realized it at the time. Looking back, Jack understood that the road to true success was never straight. It was a winding path filled with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But as long as he stayed true to his vision, as long as he continued to take risks and push the boundaries of what was possible, he knew that he was on the right path. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The lessons Musk had taught him, about vision, risk, and resilience, had transformed not just Jack, but the world around him. And as he looked to the future, Jack knew that he had only just begun to make his mark. The best was yet to come. Jack's decision to change the trajectory of his life and his company had been bold, but as he continued on his new path, the challenges seemed to multiply. The business world, which had once felt so familiar and predictable, was now an entirely different landscape, one full of uncertainty, unpredictable risks, and fierce opposition. Yet, despite the obstacles, Jack pressed on with unwavering resolve. His belief in the vision he had chosen, to build a company that didn't just seek profits, but aimed to make a significant impact on the world, became his guiding light. At first, the resistance from his colleagues and investors was overwhelming. They watched, skeptical, as Jack moved forward with projects that, in their eyes, seemed too idealistic, even reckless. They questioned his strategy, scrutinized every decision, and warned him that his focus on social responsibility would cost the company dearly. But Jack was undeterred. He had spent too many years chasing financial gains alone, believing that success was measured solely by the size of a bank account or the market share his company controlled. He had learned from Elon Musk that true progress often required a willingness to sacrifice, to gamble with everything on ideas that seemed impossible. And so, Jack continued pushing forward, investing in sustainable technologies, green initiatives, and projects that aimed to help underserved communities, projects that could disrupt entire industries for the better. It wasn't long before the challenges started to weigh on him. There were sleepless nights spent wondering if he had made the right decision, if the financial risks he was taking would pay off, or if he was simply throwing away everything he had built. But despite these doubts, Jack never lost sight of his purpose. He knew that to truly create change, to leave a meaningful legacy, he had to keep going. He couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything he had already risked. Then came the first breakthrough. After months of working on a new eco-friendly energy solution, one that could provide affordable electricity to remote regions, Jack's company finally achieved a major milestone. They secured a partnership with a global environmental organization, one with the resources and reach to make a tangible difference. The deal was a turning point, not just for Jack's company, but for his own personal journey. It proved that his vision, despite the doubts and setbacks, could be realized. The world didn't need more of the same, more businesses chasing profits at any cost. The world needed innovators who dared to think differently, to take risks, and to create solutions that could address the pressing issues of the time. With this victory, the narrative around Jack began to shift. The media, which had once painted him as a reckless idealist, now turned its attention to his company's breakthroughs. His once criticized decision to focus on sustainability was now seen as a game-changing move that positioned his business at the forefront of an industry-wide shift toward environmentally responsible practices. The investors who had pulled away at the beginning were now coming back, eager to be part of the success that Jack had dared to create. His company's reputation as a leader in both profit and purpose began to grow, and with it, so did Jack's confidence. But even with success on the horizon, Jack never forgot the lessons he had learned. The stakes were higher now, and the pressure to maintain his company's growth was immense. Every new venture, every innovative project, carried with it the risk of failure. And yet, Jack felt more alive than he ever had before. The thrill of risk, of pushing the boundaries, was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. His company was not just a business anymore, it was a movement. A symbol of what could be achieved when profit and purpose aligned. In the years that followed, Jack's business continued to grow, and with it, his influence. He became a sought-after speaker at global conferences, a leader who advocated for a future where businesses could be both profitable and socially responsible. His company was no longer just about products or services, it was about creating a legacy that would outlast him. He knew that true success was not about how much money you made or how many accolades you received. It was about the impact you had on the world, the changes you sparked, and the people you inspired to think differently. But Jack's journey wasn't without its struggles. As the company grew, so did the complexities of managing it. He faced internal conflicts, disagreements with partners, and the ongoing challenge of balancing profit with purpose. At times, the pressure was unbearable. Jack often found himself questioning whether he was still on the right path. But in those moments of doubt, he would remember the advice that had set him on this course in the first place: it's not about the wins. It's about how you rise after the fall. There were moments when everything seemed to be falling apart, when deals collapsed, when projects failed, when the weight of his decisions felt too heavy to bear. But through each setback, Jack learned to rise. He became more resilient, more determined, and more focused on his mission. He had discovered that failure wasn't a destination, it was a stepping stone toward something greater. And with each failure, his resolve grew stronger. As Jack's reputation grew, so did his sense of responsibility. He was no longer just a businessman, he was a leader, a mentor, and a symbol of change. He began to mentor young entrepreneurs, sharing his story and encouraging them to take risks, to think beyond the bottom line, and to pursue ventures that could make a real difference. Jack's own transformation had become a beacon for others, a testament to the power of vision, resilience, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. But Jack was also deeply aware of the cost of his journey. He had sacrificed much along the way: relationships, time, and even his own peace of mind. There were days when he questioned whether it had all been worth it. The weight of his responsibilities sometimes felt suffocating. But when he looked at the impact his company had made, when he saw the communities that had been transformed, the innovations that had reshaped industries, and the legacy that was slowly taking shape, he knew it had been worth it. Looking back, Jack realized how far he had come. He had gone from a man driven solely by profit and success to someone who sought to change the world for the better. He had taken the risks, faced the failures, and ultimately found the success he had once only dreamed of, but not in the way he had expected. His success was not just measured by the size of his bank account or the market share his company controlled. It was measured by the lives he had touched, the change he had sparked, and the example he had set for others. And so, as Jack stood at the helm of his company, looking out over the horizon, he knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles, and new opportunities to seize. But the lessons he had learned, about risk, resilience, and the power of purpose, would guide him through whatever came next. Jack had found his true calling, not just to build a successful company, but to leave a lasting legacy that would inspire others to follow in his footsteps. He had learned, as Musk had once told him, that the future wasn't about playing it safe. It was about taking risks, challenging the status quo, and changing the world. And Jack was ready for whatever came next.